All right. So before I begin my speech, I would like to let it known that my speech is uh, it's not politically inclined to any sort of ideology, and it's for informative purposes. So, who among you recognizes this picture? Please raise your hand. Right. Basically, anyone older than me should have seen this picture at least once in their lifetime. So crude oil, or katrintos, is something that still stains our former president's Dell to this day. The word crude means primitive, rudimentary, or rough. Basically means unprocessed. And oil is also one of the hydrocarbons. Hydrocarbons are a set of chemical compounds that only include hydrogen and carbon. So examples of hydrocarbons would include coal, oil, natural gases, and alcohol. Basically the stuff we burn, right? So let's look at what are made from this crude oil. So first of all, it's benzene, diesel, the stuff we put in our cars, butane gas, and jet fuel, which is for airplanes, and a ton of other stuff, including plastic. So before I get deeper into the subject, let's go over some terminology so you have better understanding. So there's gas, petrol, and benzene. So gas is mostly used in US, Canada, and Latin America, or gasoline. And petrol is used in the UK and the former colonies, including India and Australia, and some parts of Africa as well. Benzene, as you all know, is used in Mongolia, Russia, and Germany. They all mean the fuel we put in our cars. But people mock Americans for using this word gas because it's not gas, it's liquid, dummy. But gasoline is actually not derived from the word gas as in air. Americans, being Americans, they've turned a brand name into a product name. So this gasoline name was first originated from this person called John Cassell. John Cassell was the first person who commercially started selling lighter fluids, and eventually it became gasoline. As for benzene, benzene is a chemical compound that is only found in small amounts in the fuel we use in our cars today. I'm not sure how these three countries started using this, but nowadays benzene is not really relevant to the fuel we use today. So out of these three, I personally think that the word petrol is probably the most accurate one. Even, you guys use the Vaseline, right? Vaseline, the oil. Vaseline is actually, it's petroleum jelly. The ingredient is called petroleum jelly. It's a byproduct made from crude oil. That doesn't mean you're putting oil on your lips, but that's just a byproduct, okay? So here are another set of terminologies. So out of this crude oil, we first have the conventional oil, which is on the lighter side of this scale. It's mostly close. It's the closest to the car fuel we use today. It's convenient to process and it's very lucrative. Now then we have ultra heavy crude oil, which is this very dark, and very viscous, almost, it's like liquid, almost like molasses, right? It's very hard to process into petrol. It takes a lot of process, a lot of money, and it's also environmentally very polluting. And it's on the heavier side of the scale here. And then next up, we've got tar sand, which is basically just oil mixed with dirt, sand, and a bunch of other stuff. Again, this is extremely difficult to process, and it's also very environmentally polluting. So let's look into the world of oil producing and trade. In this world, there are two terminologies describing two specific regions. First of all is called the Major Crescent, which includes the Arab, Asian, and Slavic countries. And this part of the world has about 35% of the oil in the world. That's a huge number. And then we have something called Minor Crescent, which includes Venezuela, Mexico, Alaska, and Canada. And this part is about 25% of the world oil reserves. Now, that's a rough estimate, okay? Just a rough estimate to make it easier to understand. So, out of the minor crescents, only Mexico has the conventional oil, the oil that is easy to process. Now, Venezuela, the South American country, has the ultra-heavy crude oil. And Canada has the tar sand reserves. In fact, the Canadian tar sand reserve is so large that if Canada manages to process them, the ratio between the minor crescent and the major crescent will be something like 50-50. It's that large. So now let's look into the current geopolitical conflict in the world today. Let's dig a little deeper, right? Let's see what's really happening out in the world. So Russia used to deliver oil and other burnable things to Europe. But because of the Russia and Ukraine conflict, Russia was put on trade sanction. Sanction is basically a trade ban. Russia can't trade with other countries. European countries, they can't just freeze to death in the winter, right? So they have to get their oil from the Middle East, the Arabian countries, Saudi Arabia, Arabian Emirates, Iran, Iraq, and also Qatar. In fact, one of the reasons that Qatar managed to organize the World Cup this year is because of this, because of the money from this oil trade. So the Middle East started to trade heavily with Europe. And the biggest traders, the biggest exporting destinations for Russia was first the EU and next China. And now because China has their significant amount of oil trade removed, China has to look for other places to get their oil. And of course, China, being China, has its fingers dipped in so many places in the world, right? So China is interested into South America, especially Venezuela. So for the last few years, China has been building infrastructures, schools, and hospitals in South American countries. Not only Venezuela, but the South American countries in a whole. And they're doing this, guess what? Why? In an attempt to establish a agreeable oil trade arrangements. So China is doing all this great stuff to South American countries. They're building all these stuffs, and they're gonna trade with them. They're gonna trade their oil to China, and China's gonna bring other consumer goods. which is very lucrative, very beneficial for these poor South American countries. But here's the catch. When you're in trade with China, there's always a catch. In order for these countries, these South American countries, to get into trade with China, they have to deny the independence of this small island country called Taiwan. Now, Taiwan produces about half the world's microchips. The small green microchip in your phones, in your TVs, in your laptops, half of them. Most likely, the green chip in your phone was produced in Taiwan. So Taiwan is a, how do you say it, strategically beneficial area. So, of course, China doesn't want Taiwan to become independent. And in order for these South American countries to trade with China, they have to deny Taiwan's independence. And so far, the South American countries and the Caribbean countries, out of 33 countries in this region, only 8 countries remain to recognize Taiwan as an independent country. So the conclusion is that, well, situation's looking very tough for Taiwan. I'm not sure if they're gonna stand or not. And, well, that's about it. And now it's time for discussion time. I would like to hear your thoughts, any more insights or any questions. Yes, that boy.
They could just rename Taiwan as like China.
Well, in that case, it's not very good for Taiwan, isn't it? Because they would still be dependent on China, and they want to become independent country, right? And I don't think changing names is going to do too much, though. What else do you think? Do you have any questions about oils? Oh, yeah, you.
How do you process the crude
oil? Well, I'm not an expert, though. I gotta say, I'm not an expert. But I can tell you one thing, though. The reason why everything's price goes up when oil price goes up has got a few good reasons. One, of course, it's logistics, right? Every car, every ship, they all use oil. And secondly, because plastic is made from oil, and plastic is in everything. And those are two very big reasons. All right. Any other questions? Yeah.
Vaseline?
Can we burn Vaseline? Afraid not. No. Vaseline is not burnable. It's not flammable. Any questions from the committee? Who? Oh, yeah, sure.
Well, Vaseline is a byproduct of oil. How is it made?
How is it made?
What
Well, Vaseline is simply just one ingredient. It's petroleum jelly. That's it. So by processing crude oil into benzene and other fuel, the petroleum jelly is just, it's just left behind. And people just gather it, make it a little bit more softer, a little bit nicer, give it a little scent, and that's it. So yeah, the stuff you put on your lips is very closely attached to this black mess of a liquid. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for your informative presentation. Honestly, I'm not aware of political issues around the world being such all around the world. So what you said is very important. We should research and we should experience such things. My question for you is why did you choose this topic and what motivated you? I'm just curious.
Yeah. I'm a business student, so I'm required to read a bunch of stuff for my assignments and all that. And also because, you know, when I was little, my mother always used to tell me, if you want to become someone important, like a really good investor or an economist or a banker or someone political, then you have to read a lot of news, son. You have to read the news from Bloomberg. You have to know the geopolitical situation and everything from the news. So you have to read a lot. So this topic just came to me. I didn't really have much reason, initial incentive to read this, but I was reading on the Qatar football thing, and one thing led to another. I was reading oil production, and I was into benzene and the chemical structures, and it's a yeah. I just came across. Yeah.
Impressive.
Yeah. All right. Is that it? Is there any more question? Yes.
One quick question. I'm curious about how you see gas and oil production in the context of Mongolia. You started with a picture of an ex-president.
Oh, yes.
And I'm curious how you tie all of this together.
Yes. I owe our foreign friends here an explanation, don't I? So let's go back. So this is our former president, actually our first president, P. Oturbat. And this is a picture of him smearing crude oil to his Dell in delight of discovering a oil reserve in Dornat province to the east. So the oil reserve was discovered way back in 1997, but since then, the production part hasn't been really progressive, to be honest. Yeah, and it's still a funny picture, though. The fact that he actually smeared this black stuff on his white Dell. Yeah, and actually, I heard that he offered this Dell for like $100,000 at the time to one foreign investor who intended to build some sort of oil museum, something like that. Yeah, I'm not sure if that deal happened, but yeah. All right, is that it? All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so comment section is now. This is coming.